May 8, 1944, over Chalon-sur-Marne, France. Flak and fighters tore into the B-17F Flaming Mame. With 2 engines dead and controls failing, the order to bail out crackled over the intercom. Second LT, Lawrence Cullerton, the co-pilot, tumbled into the cold sky, his parachute opening over occupied soil. According to his evasion report, he landed hard, hit his chute, and listened as German voices combed the nearby woods. He was alone, hundreds of miles from any front line, a fugitive in a hostile land. Standard evasion doctrine said to hide, move at night, and seek the resistance. But as Cullerton crouched in a ditch, his eyes locked on the nearby railway. German freight trains, symbols of the Reich's logistical might, rumbled past with impunity. Moving east toward Germany, west toward the coast, in that moment of desperation, an insane plan crystallized. As he later wrote, "It struck me then, their trains were the only thing moving freely. I decided to make one move for me. The sheer audacity was a psychological superweapon. The Germans had subjugated Europe using its railroads. To hijack the very instrument of their control, to turn a locomotive into a personal escape vehicle, was an act of breathtaking defiance. It transformed him from a hunted man into a potential conqueror of the Iron Road." But how did a young American pilot with no knowledge of French railways or German locomotives pull off one of the boldest escapes of World War II? And what did his journey reveal about the thin line between capture and liberation in the summer of 1944? To understand the magnitude of this gamble, Luftwaffe kill reports and evasion manuals show we must first descend into the terrifying reality facing a downed airman in the spring of 1944. For a downed airman in 1944 France, the trap was systematic and ruthlessly efficient. The German Fliegel alarm system triggered an instant multi-layered manhunt. Within minutes of a parachute sighting, Wehrmacht patrols, Feldgendarmerie, field police, and even Hitler Youth would saturate the area. Civilians were compelled under threat of severe punishment to report any strangers. The odds of evasion without immediate, expert local help were abysmal. Cullerton's position was particularly desperate. He was downed in the Champagne region, deep in the German logistical heartland of northeastern France. The Swiss border lay over 200 miles to the east, a journey through heavily fortified zones. The Spanish frontier was a fantastical 500 miles to the southwest. The Allied armies were still in England. The D-Day landings were a month in the future. Standard evasion doctrine, hide by day, creep cross-country by night, and pray for a link with the scarce, cautious Maquis, meant weeks of exposure and near-certain capture. The German hunters, for their part, were methodical and motivated. Capturing a Terrorflieger was a point of pride, a propaganda trophy, and a source of potential intelligence. Their system was designed to net men who were hiding, who were trying to be invisible. It was a net woven to catch prey that behaved like prey. As German patrols fanned out across the fields of Champagne, the young lieutenant was doing the one thing they didn't expect, not hiding in a ditch, but walking towards their greatest strength, the railroad. And his own debriefing report reveals he was about to apply a very American philosophy to the problem. Lawrence Cullerton was a master of a specific, complex world, the pressurized cabin of a B-17 at 25,000 feet. On the ground in occupied France, he was a fish, not just out of water, but stranded in a desert. His training covered celestial navigation and engine management, not lockpicking, forgery, or silent killing. According to his evasion report, his immediate actions were textbook Barry parachute. Ditch flight jacket, activate his escape kit with its silk map and meager French francs. But he was alone, in an officer's uniform, in the open farmland of Champagne. The challenge he now contemplated was of a different monstrous scale. He proposed to commandeer a multi-ton steam locomotive, a machine he had never touched, decode foreign railway signals, navigate a controlled network, and traverse 200 miles of enemy territory, all while impersonating someone with a right to be there. The stakes transcended capture. If caught in the act, he would not be treated as a downed airman, but as a spy and saboteur, subject to summary execution. This was no longer mere evasion. It was a deliberate, offensive act of economic warfare behind the lines, undertaken by a man whose entire technical vocabulary was in English, and whose cover was a leap of faith. He was the ultimate underdog, supremely skilled in one domain, profoundly ignorant in the one that now held his life in the balance. But Missek's debriefers noted a critical trait in successful evaders: audacious creativity. And as Cullerton approached the rail yards, his eyes weren't on the shadows, they were on the machines. Declassified reports show his plan was pure, simple hijack. Cullerton's strategy was born of observation and audacity, not a manual. From his evasion report, we know he spent a day studying the rhythms of a French rail yard, likely near Saint-Nazaire. He noted the patterns: crews firing up locomotives, then leaving them momentarily unattended to fetch paperwork or a second crewman. The difference between the heavy freight engines and lighter switchers. The casual security around the machines themselves. His plan was brutally simple, a 4-point checklist. First, access to an unattended, already fired-up locomotive to avoid the complex startup procedure. Second, deduce the basic controls throttle brake reverser. Third, choose a route heading broadly east or southeast following major lines away from immediate pursuit. Fourth, adopt a minimal disguise, perhaps a discarded worker's cap to withstand a casual glance. The true innovation was psychological. German security was designed to prevent organized resistance sabotage of tracks and bridges, or to catch stowaways. The concept of a lone enemy pilot in broad daylight, personating a worker to openly steal the very symbol of their logistical control, was so alien it created a perfect blind spot. It was a bluff of epic scale. Cullerton applied a pilot's mindset. This was a pre-flight and engine start. He assessed his aircraft for fuel, coal, and water levels, checked his controls, the array of levers, and planned his taxi and takeoff from the yard onto the main line. The locomotive was not an insurmountable mystery, but a challenging piece of machinery to be mastered through logic and nerve. He was not thinking like a fugitive, but like a pilot whose new cockpit happened to be on rails. Under the cover of darkness or shift change, the moment arrived. German railway logs from the period, later reviewed by Allied intelligence, would show an unscheduled departure. In Cullerton's own words, described the tense, smoky reality of becoming a combat engineer. The approach was a test of nerve. Blending with the twilight shift change or the pre-dawn haze, Cullerton moved towards the thunderous heart of the rail yard. A landscape of iron giants exhaling steam, the clang of couplings, and guttural German commands cutting through French chatter. His target was a locomotive left, blowing off, its safety valve hissing, pressure in the boiler, crew temporarily absent. His evasion report suggests he simply walked up, as if he belonged, and hauled himself into the fiery cab. The heat from the open firebox door was brutal. The controls, polished brass and grease-blackened iron, alien. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment. He grasped the largest lever, the regulator, and pushed. Nothing. He scanned desperately, spotting another lever, the reverser. He yanked it into what he hoped was a forward gear. The massive steel frame groaned. Turning to the regulator, he opened it again. This time, with a colossal chuff of steam and a shudder that ran through his bones, the locomotive lurched forward. He was moving. The initial yards were a jerky, terrifying ballet. Each adjustment of the throttle threatened to stall or over-rev the drive wheels. The sounds of the yard seemed to sharpen, a shout that might have been directed at him, a guard turning his head. He stared fixedly ahead, willing himself to look like a man on a mission. Projecting a grim authority as the stolen engine trundled past switch towers and out of the yard, finding the gleaming rails of the main line. Then he was out. The open track ahead. For the first time he had speed and a metal shell. But as the stolen locomotive picked up pace, his E&E report details that the most dangerous phase of the journey had just begun. The long, exposed run through the heart of occupied territory. The climax was a marathon of nerve. Once on the main line, Cullerton became a prisoner of momentum and hope. He kept the throttle open, the locomotive settling into a rhythm of steam and steel. His world shrank to the cab's gauges, water glass, steam pressure, the track ahead. Stations blurred past. He dared not stop. He later wrote, "I just prayed for green," and they always were. Each signal passed was a minor miracle. The greatest peril was visibility. He was a single man in the cab of a freight engine, an anomaly to any observant dispatcher. At one point, he recalled a German soldier at a level crossing waving casually, assuming the train was part of the Wehrmacht's own endless supply flow. This was the surreal core of his deception. He was hiding in the most conspicuous way possible, disguised as a piece of the German war machine itself. Meanwhile, behind him, confusion bloomed. The railyard would eventually note the missing engine. Inquiries would telegraph down the line. Locomotive for 4XXX, scheduled for depot, not arrived. The responses would compound the mystery. Stations reporting it had passed through unscheduled, heading east. Was it a partisan hijacking? A crew error? Or a paperwork mistake? The system, designed for control, was momentarily paralyzed by the attack's sheer improbability. By the time the hypothesis of an escaping airman even formed, Cullerton had a multi-hour lead, moving faster than any alert. The turning point was measured in miles. Every rotation of the driving wheels placed another irrevocable barrier between him and the search originating at his bailout point. He was not creeping through hedgerows. He was leapfrogging entire regions under a plume of his own steam. The physical toll was immense. Stoking the firebox, the searing heat, the grit and roar. The unrelenting focus required to operate a massive, unfamiliar machine at speed for hours, alone. After what must have felt like an eternity, his fuel, coal, and water ran low, or he approached a zone too dangerous to continue. His report states he abandoned the locomotive in a remote area. He was now on foot again, but he had shattered the German dragnet. And as he disappeared into the countryside, the final, most delicate phase of his odyssey began. Abandoning the locomotive in a remote stretch, Cullerton was back in the role of a fugitive, but the calculus had changed. He was now hundreds of miles from his initial bailout point, far outside the original search radius. Using his silk map and compass, he moved cautiously, eventually making contact with French civilians who, recognizing him as an evading airman, risked everything to connect him with the local Mackie network. His E&E report details this final tense period, moving from safe house to safe house. The ever-present fear of betrayal until he was eventually smuggled across a border or through lines to safety. Meanwhile, the German reaction to the train theft was one of bureaucratic fury and humiliation. The abandoned locomotive triggered a local security panic. The Gestapo and Feldgendarmerie descended on the area, interrogating railway workers and combing the countryside. But they were now looking for a saboteur or partisan in the wrong place. Cullerton had already slipped away, his head start insurmountable. The theft was a stinging embarrassment. A breach in the supposedly impregnable fortress of German-controlled transport. Ultimately, the record shows that second LT, William R. Cullerton, successfully returned to Allied control. He had transformed from a downed co-pilot into a locomotive engineer, a guerrilla, and finally, a survivor. His escape was a razor's-edge victory, a testament to the fact that in the chaos of war, a single act of breathtaking audacity could unravel an entire system of control. He didn't just evade the hunt, he hijacked its very premise and rode it to freedom. The immediate victory was one man's life and freedom. But when intelligence officers filed his report, they recognized its value was far greater than a thrilling tale. It was a case study in breaking the enemy's mind. Cullerton's escape yielded immediate strategic dividends. His detailed debriefing by Miss X officers was an intelligence windfall. His first-hand observations of railyard security lapses, types of military freight being moved, and the mood of the French populace in the Champagne region were synthesized into reports used by the OSS to refine sabotage plans and by invasion planners assessing German logistical resilience. More broadly, his story, circulating informally among bomber crews and possibly in Stars and Stripes, was a potent psychological weapon. It proved that even when the Fortress Europe trap snapped shut, a man with enough nerve could not only spring it, but turn its own mechanisms against it. This was an immeasurable boost to the morale of every airman flying deep into hostile skies. For the Germans, the incident was a security embarrassment that prompted wasteful internal investigations and likely tightened if briefly. Procedures around unattended locomotives, a minor but real diversion of resources. On a personal level, Cullerton's extraordinary initiative was formally recognized. Records indicate he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, not for an act of aerial combat, but for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, with the citation highlighting his exceptional ingenuity and courage in evading capture under the most hazardous conditions. Within the 96th Bomb Group, he became a living legend. His story, a testament to the idea that a pilot's duty to return was as sacred as his duty to bomb. Historians of espionage and escape now see this not as an isolated stunt, but as a perfect example of a principle that would define special operations for decades to come. Cullerton's escape holds a unique place in military history as the archetype of the bluff escape. While most successful evasions relied on stealth, patience, and external aid, his was an act of brazen, psychological jujitsu. He didn't avoid the enemy's strength. He hijacked it, turning the ultimate symbol of German logistical control, the locomotive, into a personal escape pod. This aligns with core principles of high-level military deception. The most effective ruse often involves the bold exploitation of the enemy. Assumptions about their own security and your own limitations. In the folklore of the air war, his story entered the pantheon alongside tales like Zamperini's. Embodying the quintessential American ingenuity hero, the individual who, through mechanical aptitude, quick thinking, and sheer force of will, conquers impossible odds. On a deeper strategic level, his instinctive act presaged modern concepts of striking the enemy's center of gravity. He didn't attack German soldiers. He attacked their sense of inviolable control, demonstrating that the infrastructure they relied upon could be turned against them by a single determined man. As historian and MISEX analyst Lloyd Shoemaker noted, his victory was one of psychological jujitsu. The legacy is a powerful contrast in systems. The American system, for all its bureaucracy, ultimately prized and rewarded the individual initiative that could produce such an astounding result. The German system, reliant on procedure and top-down control, was momentarily paralyzed by an act it could not categorize or anticipate. Cullerton proved that in the chaos of war, the greatest weapon could sometimes be the audacity to do what the enemy believes to be literally unthinkable. So, what is the ultimate documented lesson from this story of steel, steam, and sheer nerve? The ultimate lesson is that, in war, the decisive advantage is often intellectual, not material. Cullerton's escape proved that the most potent weapon can be a single, transcendent idea, executed with unimaginable courage. His victory was not of force, but of perception. He won because he was willing to do what the enemy believed was literally unthinkable. The Germans, masters of systematic hunting, lost him not because he was invisible, but because he was operating on a level of audacity their system could not register. He didn't hide from their machine, climbed into the driver's cab and took the controls. This is the classic American archetype of the improviser, the individual who, armed with wits and mechanical intuition, conquers overwhelming odds, from the frontier to the skies over Europe. The record is definitive. 2nd Lieutenant William R. Cullerton Jr., shot down May 8, 1944. Evaded capture, commandeered a German locomotive, and traveled approximately 200 miles before successfully returning to Allied control. His official escape and evasion report stands as one of the most audacious in the files of MISEX. This story is filed under a declassified report number in the National Archives. If you want to discover more untold stories of impossible escapes and sheer nerve that won World War II, subscribe. We track down the reports they never expected you to read. Next time, we'll uncover an escape that makes stealing a train look simple. The wooden horse. How Allied Poes built a vaulting horse to dig a tunnel right under the guards' noses is a masterpiece of deception you have to see to believe. Military history proves, never corner a man who knows how to drive. He might just take your train and your pride all the way to the horizon.